Recently, I started a petition demanding that Albino Galuppini step down as webmaster for the Bill Kaysing tribute site. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, please watch my trilogy of videos initiating the boycott. The long and short of it is, after Bill Kaysing's death in 2005, Albino Galuppini created a website in honor of Bill Kaysing that was supposed to pay tribute to Bill Kaysing's life, work, and various projects. Not just his work on the Apollo Moon Hoax, but all his areas of interest. Sheltering the homeless, eating healthy, hot springs, motorcycle safety, you name it. Then in 2014, Galuppini stabbed Bill Kaysing, his family, and supporters in the back by jumping ship to the flat earth nonsense and misusing Kaysing's legacy to try and prop up that nonsense. Among other things, Galuppini has falsely claimed that Kaysing denied any rocket can reach orbital velocity and thus get into Earth orbit, therefore implying that Kaysing believed that all space travel is faked. This allegation is directly contradicted by Kaysing himself, who specifically said that it was possible to get into orbit in both his book and the interviews that he gave. Viewers are strongly encouraged to sign my petition demanding that Albino Galuppini step down as webmaster for the Bill Kaysing tribute website and relinquish his website managing duties to someone wise enough to know better than to subscribe to the flat earth nonsense. The day after I published my video specifically exposing Galuppini's betrayal, he responded to it in his blog. And I say responded very loosely. Amazingly, all he did was simply provide a link to the video in question, and rather than attempt to address any of its content, he instead tried to save face and talk his way around it. I have a hard time trying to understand Jarrah's real terror about me being a flat earther. After all, Bill Kaysing's books comply 100% with a global hoax. Jarrah is so upset that some of the claims he made appear to be quite frankly insane. The moon hoax is just one piece of a puzzle in a world of deception pulled off by devil's worshippers. Is it so difficult to figure out? This is my modest opinion. First, opinion does not equal fact. Second, in what way does the following passage from Kaysing's book comply with a global hoax? As a backup, a special satellite contained a tape unit that could be triggered by the Apollo Simulation Control Station at Mercury, Nevada. And there are several other statements by Kaysing in which he cites data from various satellite and space probe missions, including Tetra, Biosatellite, and Surveyor. Not to mention this interview clip, in which Kaysing specifically proposes keeping the astronauts in low orbit.
The astronauts were launched with the Saturn V. Then, in order to account for their disappearance, they simply orbited the Earth for 8 days. And in the interim, they showed these fake pictures of the astronauts on the moon. But on the 8th day, the command capsule separated from the vehicle and descended to Earth, as of course was shown in films.
Third, the claim that I am acting insane. Galuppini has repeatedly pulled the "you're going insane" card on me in personal and public communication in response to my disapproval of his flat earth nonsense and betrayal of Bill Kaysing. This is essentially laughable. Coming from somebody who goes around claiming that the Earth is flat, that all space travel is fake, and even that free energy is real, he is in no position to lecture others on who's acting insane. But I will let my viewers be the judge. Believe it or not, there was a lot cut from my video boycotting Galuppini's website. In part 2 of my trilogy, I highlighted a small selection of the many ridiculous claims that Galuppini has been propagating on his website. I had a lot to say in response to these claims, but it became clear that I had too much to say and was giving equal weight to all of these things. And it was ultimately distracting from the main focus of the video, which was Galuppini's betrayal of Bill Kaysing. So I specifically focused on the false claims in which Galuppini tried to directly associate with Bill Kaysing, and the rest made the cutting room floor. But now, here's what made the cutting room floor. You tell me, who's acting insane here? Me? Or Albino Galuppini? The claims Albino has made include implying that no rockets get into space because they curve during liftoff, which actually is exactly what they are supposed to do in order to get into orbit in the first place.
Because going into space is not just simply a matter of going up, it's a matter of going up and then sideways so fast that you just continue to fall around the Earth.
He also claims that the videos from SpaceX are all CGI, and that there are no independent videos from spectators who saw the Falcon 9 launch and landings. He falsely alleges that Polaris can be seen from the southern hemisphere, that the Challenger crew are all still alive and still living under the same names, that the satellites people see in the night sky are in fact just high-altitude balloons, and it generally denies that photos and videos taken from high-altitude flights show curvature. These are all completely ridiculous claims that do not even pass primary school levels of scrutiny. I already debunked the completely disrespectful claim that the Challenger crew are still alive in a previous video. A link is in the description. As for his other claims, I have repeatedly explained to Albino why rockets curve during liftoff. In personal communication, he sent Bill Kaysing, myself, and several other recipients a link to a video recorded by an airline passenger clearly showing the space shuttle during its roll maneuver.
That's good enough.
Now listen, we don't want to have anybody complain because we were late. See, y'all got to see that. Then you can complain because we were late. Got it? All right. Drinks are on the house, too.
Unbelievable.
He claimed this was evidence of a hoax.
It appears from a plane that the space shuttle curved sideward well before reaching orbit altitude, this way acting just like a normal ballistic missile. How can shuttle take a 45-degree trajectory at maybe 20 miles altitude only? Several videos show this behavior.
This demonstrates a classic example of poor research by the Flat Earth crowd. Many flat earthers and space travel deniers seem to be of the belief that rockets should fly straight up into the sky in order to get into space, and are confused why they curve during liftoff. But as a quick Google search reveals, the answer to this question is all over the internet. As I explained to Albino in my reply, the shuttle curving during its launch is to be expected. In fact, it is to be expected of any spacecraft trying to get into orbit. An orbit is simply a state in which your forward speed is the same as your downward freefall speed. In the case of the shuttle, it is falling back to the Earth at 7 kilometers per second, but it is also moving forward at 7 kilometers per second. Subsequently, it doesn't fall straight down. It continuously arcs around the curvature. To achieve this horizontal momentum, it needs to curve during launch. If the shuttle just continued going straight up, yes, it would get into space, but it wouldn't be able to remain in space for very long. It would have little to no horizontal momentum and would come crashing back down to the Earth when the engine stops. I also provided a link to a video by YouTube user Rhetoric, who did a great video explaining why rocket trajectories curve to get into space. The language in this video is a bit colourful, but it's straight to the point.
So even though you're always falling towards Earth, the Earth always curves away from you just as fast. And as it turns out, you don't need any fuel to fall. Who would have fucking thought? So if you want to stay in space for long periods of time, what do you think we have to do to stay there for, oh I don't know, 17 years for example? That's right, you dumb fuck. In order to stay in space, you need to get into orbit before your fuel runs out. You can't just launch straight up and magically stay in the fucking sky. That's not how any of this shit works. So what is the best way of achieving this equilibrium? Well, let's imagine we have two rockets on the launch pad. One is going to follow a curved trajectory to the needed altitude, and the other is just going to go straight up. Now the rocket that followed the curved trajectory would be able to maintain its momentum and use that momentum to get into orbit. For the rocket going straight up, it would have little to no horizontal momentum, so it would have to come close to a stop, have to swing a 90, and then accelerate all over again. And let's hope they can accelerate fast enough before falling back to Earth. Because, you know.
Gravity, you fucking retard!
I mean seriously, which would you do if you had to pay for it? You have fuel efficient, you have wasteful, you have logical, and you have... no, it's not logical at all.
This very simple fact has been explained to Albino repeatedly in personal communication, yet he continues to cite rockets curving during liftoff as so-called evidence that they are not going into space. How is this so difficult to understand? This is what the trajectory looks like from the ground. This is what that same trajectory would look like if you could see it from space. Seriously, why is that so difficult to understand? They even make a joke in the 1993 film Reckless Kelly, which, despite being a comedy, ironically demonstrates exactly why you can't get into orbit by flying straight up. During the final climactic sequence in the film, an aviation fuel pump catches fire and takes off like a rocket, soaring directly up into space without curving its trajectory at all. And as can be expected in real life, it comes falling back down to the Earth when the fuel runs out.
Unless you have friends in heaven, Kelly, you're out of luck.
Such is life. Amen.
And his claim that the satellites people do see in the sky are just high-altitude balloons is just ludicrous. Satellites in low orbit travel so fast that they traverse the sky in about 3 to 4 minutes. And lunar transits take less than a second. High-altitude balloons would take hours to traverse the sky, or even the moon. And you can not only see orbiting satellites with the naked eye, you can even resolve them through telescopes, and clearly see the solar panels, modules, the antennas, and other parts of the spacecraft. You can tell they are obviously not high-altitude balloons. If they were in Earth's atmosphere, moving at that speed would mean the solar panels and other critical components would simply be ripped off by the aerodynamic forces. As for Polaris being visible below the equator, afraid not. Flat Earthers are obsessed with Polaris, the North Pole star, because they seem to think that stars rotating around the northern celestial pole is consistent with their idea of living under a dome containing the night sky. But what about the southern hemisphere? Below the equator, you cannot see Polaris, or many of the northern stars. You'll instead see the southern stars rotating around the southern celestial pole. As explained previously, the equator is the only location on the Earth where you'll see both sets of stars simultaneously as they rotate around their respective celestial poles. The fact that we have very different stars and constellations in the northern and southern hemispheres is more proof that the Earth is a sphere. A southern observer's view of the northern stars is blocked by the Earth's curvature, and vice versa. In an attempt to prove that Polaris is visible below the equator, Albino simply mirrored a video posted by flat Earth idiot Antonio Subirats, added his own Italian translation over the original English audio, and made it the subject of one of his blog articles. It is important to note that Subirats didn't actually go to the southern hemisphere himself to prove that Polaris can be seen. Instead, he simply saw an image of star trails as seen from the La Silla Observatory in Chile, found in a Google Images search, assumed it must be Polaris, and proclaimed it was indeed Polaris. And that was it. There was no further investigation or any attempts to verify what he thought was Polaris was indeed Polaris. He just went with that false assumption and made a whole video out of it. After it was pointed out that the star trails in the photo actually correspond to the south celestial pole, not the north, Subirats promptly pulled the original video. But Albino kept his up and continued to propagate this debunked nonsense. This is just inexcusable. It's not like Albino lacks the means to confirm whether or not Polaris can be seen from the southern hemisphere. He has contact with a guy on the inside, or rather, down under. I have lived in Australia my whole life, and thus I have lived in the southern hemisphere my whole life. And I can confirm that Polaris cannot be seen down here. The star closest to the southern celestial pole is Sigma Octantis, not Polaris. The rest of the southern stars certainly appear to rotate around it, but unlike its northern counterpart, Sigma Octantis is extraordinarily dim, and pretty much useless for celestial navigation. No one familiar with the northern hemisphere stars would mistake it for Polaris.
Oh, rastro de estrellas desde el Observatorio La Silla, Chile. Oh dear, looks like that's Polaris. So it looks like you can see Polaris from 29 degrees south of the equator.
Oh, ecco, le stelle dell'Osservatorio La Silla in Cile. Oh, caro,
Oh dear,
sembra proprio una stella polare. E sembra che tu riesca a vedere la stella polare a 29 gradi sotto l'equatore. Guarda.
It's rather amusing how Subrats and Albino boldly and smugly claim that Polaris is visible in this picture, because the obvious difference in brightness between Polaris and Sigma Octantis is an easy way to tell if the star trail photos are taken in the north or south. In photographs of stars rotating around the north celestial pole, there is generally a small bright point almost bang on the centre, like a bullseye. That bright centre is Polaris. But in photos showing the south star trails, such as those Subrats shared with us, the centre is noticeably dark, corresponding to the fact that Sigma Octantis is extraordinarily dim. Due to Sigma Octantis being too dim, navigators in the southern hemisphere instead use a unique constellation for navigation. This is the Crux constellation. The 5 stars are extremely helpful in finding one's direction in the southern hemisphere. This constellation is practically a compass in the sky. Due to its obvious shape and the fact that it can only be seen in the southern hemisphere, the Crux is also known as the Southern Cross constellation. This is by far the most profound constellation in the southern hemisphere. Many southern hemisphere countries, including my own, feature it on their national flag. It's even mentioned in the second verse of the Australian national anthem. The Crux cannot be seen in the northern hemisphere, much the same way Polaris cannot be seen in the southern hemisphere. All Albino had to do was ask, and I would have happily verified this. Albino can't even decide whether or not my home country of Australia exists. In some articles, such as this one covering my showing up Grant Imahara at the Sydney Supernova Convention, he obviously acknowledges the existence of Australia. Yet in other articles, he implies that Australia doesn't exist. Such as this article, in which he acts surprised that Italian astronaut Umberto Gundondi is bothered by the claims that Australia doesn't exist. Or this article, in which he promotes a video alleging that the Australian history concerning these buildings in Sydney's Town Hall is a hoax. Buildings which, may I add, are about a 15-minute drive away from where I live.
In case there are any doubters out there, I can assure you Australia exists.
Over here. We're all here, mate. Come on down and see. You'll love it.
And amusingly enough, Albino's claim that no curvature is visible from high-altitude flights has been debunked by himself. For example, last September, he published an article covering a YouTube video published by flat earth idiot Jay Tolan, in which he alleged that he could see Hudson Bay whilst flying over Lake Ontario.
Wow, this is simply incredible, folks. I've labeled where I think Hudson Bay should be in the Georgian Bay. If that's really Hudson Bay, it would be over 1,000 miles away. Simply incredible, folks.
Albino considered this overwhelming proof of a flat Earth. Translation of this article reads,
Image taken from an airliner from Buffalo to Chicago with infrared camera. The Hudson Bay is identifiable despite being more than 1,600 kilometers away. Even considering a height of 10,000 meters, the bay should be located far behind the horizon, more than 120 kilometers below. Impossible to photograph if we live on a globe. Also note the absolutely flat horizon.
This is a hilarious example of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. Despite claiming this image is impossible, I was able to recreate the shot in about 5 minutes using Google Earth. And a quick cross-referencing in Google Earth and Google Maps clearly shows that the body of water seen along the horizon is not Hudson Bay, but Lake Simcoe, a much smaller body of water only about 150 kilometers away. This is essentially the Antonio Subarats incident all over again. Some fool claims he can see Hudson Bay at cruising altitudes from Lake Ontario, and without even attempting to verify it, Albino and other flat earthers blindly assume that it must be so. They really do uncritically swallow whatever garbage they find on the internet. Hell, the fact that Lake Simcoe is only kissing along the edge of the horizon should be more than enough proof that the Earth is spherical. If Earth is flat, why can't we see all the way to the North Pole, and beyond that all the way to the outermost edge of their fantasy world? And absolutely flat horizon? Did Albino even look at this video? The curvature of the Earth is seen right at the beginning of it. Ironically, the thumbnail of the video even clearly shows it. Take a screenshot and draw a line connecting the left and right edges of the horizon. You can clearly see the horizon arching above this line. And that's not all. Jay Tolan has posted many other videos taken aboard aircrafts in which he claims the horizon is flat, despite the curvature of the Earth being immediately noticeable. This stupidity is on the level of the Emperor's new clothes. The curvature of the Earth is staring Albino and other flat earthers directly in the face, and yet they claim it's not there. More recently, Albino published this article implying that no curvature is visible in this photo taken by astronaut Chris Hadfield aboard the ISS. Translation of this page reads,
"The horizon is absolutely flat from the height of the International Space Station. The photograph is probably authentic, but obtained from a high-altitude probe balloon no more than 35 or 40 kilometers from the ground. Finally, as exemplified by the diagram below, if the full moon is visible, the ISS should be on the dark side of the Earth, but the clouds are illuminated by the sun."
It is important to note that the lunar phase diagram shown below is not drawn to scale. If the moon was as close to the Earth as implied by the diagram, then yes, you wouldn't be able to see the full moon on the daylight side of the Earth. But as we established previously, the moon is indeed much further away. You would need to position the moon 30 Earth diameters away. The sheer amount of space between the two means that the moon can be both full and perfectly be in a position to be visible from the daylight side of the Earth. Without even attempting to get the dates right, I was able to recreate this shot in about 2 minutes. Literally, I timed myself. And you can clearly see the full moon from the daylight side of the Earth. And ironically, from this recreation shot, we can also see why the curvature is not visible in Chris Hadfield's photo. Look how small the moon is in my recreation compared to how big it looks in Hadfield's picture. To make the moon appear as big as it appears in Hadfield's picture, I would need to zoom in and to crop my image on the top, bottom and sides. Doing so, the curvature is no longer visible, it's being cropped out. Obviously, the Hadfield image has either been cropped or was taken with an extremely zoomed in lens, and in doing so, the curvature is outside the camera's field of view. Not good enough? Okay, here's a real video showing the moon outside the space shuttle's window. See how small the moon is? See the curvature? Now let's see what happens when I zoom in on the moon. Good golly, where did the curvature go? Oh, that's right, it's outside the field of view, of course. In any case, this is cherry picking. Over the past 21 years, the ISS astronauts have taken literally thousands of photos and videos clearly showing the curvature of the Earth. Non-composite pictures that were not taken with fisheye lenses or GoPros. The evidence of curvature provided by the ISS is overwhelming, as is the evidence of the ISS's existence. As stated previously, you can observe the ISS with the naked eye or through a telescope any day it passes overhead. Hundreds of such amateur videos are available all over YouTube. Even flat Earth con artist Jeranism proved the existence of the ISS when he recorded it transiting the moon.
My alarm went off on my phone and I knew I had 10 seconds. I counted down in my head, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I remember waiting, like what? And then sure enough, there it was. Now, one thing I did do, just because I wanted to kind of verify it a little bit further, is I took this particular image of the ISS, or supposed ISS, and the first thing I did was I chroma keyed it to take out all of the black. And now you see that, and I put it in front of the moon, and then I was able to reduce the size and get it down to the same size as the blob crossing. Spun it, turned it the right way, and overlaid it. It certainly looks to be the correct dimensions of the ISS. Fit right over it, just like that.
And Albino's claim that there is no independent verification of SpaceX's undertakings is simply wrong, and he knows it's wrong. I've sent him amateur video recordings by civilians who clearly saw the Falcon rockets take off into space and land. Hell, if you so wished, you could take a trip to the Cape and watch the next Falcon launch and landing and thus prove to yourself the reality of these missions. In fact, as early as last year, Wendy shared with us the live launch coverage of the Falcon Heavy launch, landing, and its deployment of Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster. I, in turn, shared amateur video recordings of the launch and landing, as well as sightings from the ground, clearly showing the car traverse the sky, and even the engine plume firings the upper stage did to carry the car to escape velocity. And yet, in the face of all this evidence to the contrary, Albino had the incredible gall to send Wendy and I an idiotic flat earth video implying that the Falcon Heavy mission was faked, fully endorsing its content. And yes, he really did end his message with, "Jarrah, wake up!" I sent the following reply to all the recipients. Albino, you fucking wake up! Millions of people saw the Falcon Heavy go up and come back down again. Look at these videos below. Look at the thousands, if not millions of civilians all gathered on the beach area alone. They all saw the rocket go up and come back down again. Denying that millions of people in Florida saw the Falcon Heavy landing is like denying that millions of people in Italy saw the sunrise this morning. Not to mention the fact that the Tesla was tracked optically as it orbited the Earth. They even saw the plumes of the engine firing it did to leave Earth orbit. This is not something you need rely on NASA to see. Millions of civilians all over the world saw this happen through their own telescopes. As for that bullshit video you sent me, allow me to explain why it is wrong. Now, I was going to make a point-by-point response video to this video that Albino sent us, but as you can see, this video has been taken down, and it seems the account has been either terminated or closed. It says here, this video is no longer available because the YouTube account associated with this video has been closed. I don't particularly feel like kicking a dead horse, but don't worry, you're not missing out on much. It's the same bullshit that I've already debunked in past videos. I debunked the video Albino had sent to me point by point in my reply to him. I then signed off with the following. I warned you, Albino. I warned you repeatedly. You were on thin ice, and now you've cracked it. If you're going to continue propagating flat earth bullshit, then you're on your own. Don't bother asking me to help you with your book. Don't bother asking for my endorsement. You won't get it. Don't even speak to me again until you regain some rational thought and come back to your senses. I am boycotting your website. You are a disgrace to Bill Kaysing and René. You do not have my permission to use anything from René's book unless you include this passage from him in huge capital letters. Our shuttles routinely blast off to orbit the Earth. There is not a single doubt that man is in space. And while we're on the subject, I want all copies of René's books returned to me. That's my property, and I no longer trust you with them. Jarrah. Now that you've seen who's really acting insane, I have an announcement to make. As you may recall, in the deleted scenes that I showed you, I mentioned YouTube user Rhetoric. He and I are obviously on opposite sides of the fence when it comes to the Apollo moon landings, but we have a common enemy, flat earthers. I have never reached out to him before, but Rhetoric has done a wonderful job debunking flat earth proponents and demonstrating how you can prove to yourself the curvature of the Earth and the reality of current space missions like the International Space Station or the Falcon landings. Rhetoric holds an annual dishonorable contest, the Dumb Fuck of the Year award. Needless to say, the winners have primarily been flat earthers. Sadly, nominations for 2019 are already closed. But that said, if Rhetoric is watching this video, I wish to nominate Albino Galuppini for next year's Dumb Fuck of the Year award.